I was the one who pulled the bright yellow notice from Grandpa's mailbox, but the outrage belonged to him long before the paper touched my hands. It was a Saturday that smelled like wet leaves and cold coffee. The kind of morning when the cul-de-sac moves at half-speed sprinklers ticking a dog protesting at nothing in particular, joggers pretending they aren't cold. I tugged the mailbox door and it stuck the way old hinges do when the weather turns. Then it gave with a hollow clack. Inside was a sheet so neon it felt like a siren. Across the top, violation mailbox, overnight structure, and below that, the crest of our HOA, 2 pine trees flanking a cartoon house like someone's idea of authority. I didn't have to read past the first line to hear how Grandpa would read it slowly with that dry chuckle he saves for bad law and worse manners. "Grandpa," I called, already stepping off the damp gravel in my slippers. "You got mail." He looked up from his kitchen table with his reading glasses low on his nose, a legal pad open, and a pen balanced across the top like a seesaw. Even retired, he writes like his calendar could sue him. "The electric bill," he asked. "Worse," I said, and set the yellow on the island. He stood, smoothed the page with 2 careful hands, and took one breath through his nose. If you've never seen a retired lawyer wake up, it looks exactly like this. Eyes sharp and shoulders square, and the room suddenly has witnesses. "Overnight structure." He read the corners of his mouth pulling down. "They've found poetry." Grandma Helen, to everyone who wasn't me, peeked around the fridge door with a mug. "What did they do now? They fined me for letting the mailbox be a mailbox," Grandpa said. He tapped the line that pretended to be a statute, Bylaws Fodder 3.2, temporary or permanent structures prohibited overnight. "Permanent structures," I said. "Don't those remain overnight by definition? That's what the Romans intended." Grandpa said, dry as chalk, "And the post office." I'm 26, and I like to think I'm hard to impress, but the first time my friends met Grandpa, they whispered later that he had the energy of a courthouse and a porch swing at the same time. 40 years of law will do that to a person. Nowhere to hide in the facts, plenty of places to sit in the silence. He's the only man I know who can make a joke feel like precedent. He reached for the binder he keeps in the hall closet, the one labeled in his block print Insurance or Taxes, HOA. The tabs were straight as teeth. He flipped to a dog-eared photocopy of the bylaws and skimmed the definitions page with the back of his nail. "Temporary structure," he read. "Any item erected that is not anchored permanently to ground or foundation." He looked at me over the glasses. "How deep did we set that post concrete up to my shins?" I said. "I was in high school the summer we dug it. He taught me to hold a level like it was telling the truth and to set the house numbers so a passing ambulance could read them without squinting." He nodded once the way he does when a case begins to arrange itself. "Permanent," he said, "and permitted as of 12 years ago." Helen took a slow sip. "Want to let it go?" she asked, a hopeful voice she uses for small wars and big appetites. "I want to keep my dignity," he said, and there was nothing playful in it. He pinned the notice to the mailbox post with a pushpin from the junk drawer. If the HOA wanted visibility, we'd have visibility. Eddie across the street ambled down his driveway in socks and sandals, the unofficial uniform of suburban resignation. "Morning," Eddie called. "Trouble." "Just education," Grandpa said. "On both sides." "Good luck," Eddie said. "They fined us for tulips once." "Not in the pallet." He put the phrase in air quotes, then shrugged. "We paid it." "We don't pay for fiction," Grandpa said, not unkindly. Back inside, he drew a triangle in the margin where Asari 3.2 referenced Appendix B and followed the cross-reference like a bloodhound tense, pop-up canopies, inflatable holiday displays. No mention of mailboxes unless you count those seasonal ones with Santa hats, and Grandpa's isn't seasonal unless permanent is a season. He underlined temporary and unpermitted, then set the pen down and dialed the HOA number. He uses a different voice on the phone with bureaucrats, a gentle neutral instrument like a polished spoon, not inviting a fight, inviting the rules to do their work. Maple Ridge. HOA. A receptionist answered the exact blend of friendly and immovable they teach at seminars. "How may I help you?" "This is Silas Merrick," he said. He never says Grandpa to strangers, even though half the neighborhood calls him that. I received a notice regarding my mailbox under Carry 3.2. It's permanent and permitted. I'd like the clause you're relying on and inspection of the records related to this violation. There was the smallest hitch. I can... "Note your request," she said. "Please do," he said. "And please forward my request for inspection under the member records provision. Thank you." He hung up and looked at me. "They count on tone," he said. "If you sound angry, they stop listening. If you sound bored, they start reading. Boredom is a weapon, Helen said. She didn't look like she believed it yet. I didn't either. Because in the story I'd planned for my weekend there were pancakes, not bylaws. But the HOA has a way of rewriting your calendar in pen. We walked at lunch to get the air moving through the situation Grandpa's phrase. The maple leaves looked like someone had traded green for brass overnight, and the clubhouse windows held the sky like blue glass. That's where we met her Ms. Klein, our HOA president. Charcoal blazer sunglasses, despite the weak sun, a phone held at the exact height that says you're on a very important call or need to be assumed to be on one. Ms. Klein, Grandpa said pleasantly. Mr. Merrick, she said pleasantly. I got your notice, Grandpa said. It's not personal, she said. Rules are rules. Clarity is clarity, Grandpa said. Would you be kind enough to show me where your rules cover a permitted anchored mailbox? Our bylaws are clear, she said with the small tight smile of someone who plans to use the word policy as a conversation ender. Then, Clarity won't mind being cited, Grandpa said. Her phone buzzed a lifeline she took. Further action will follow if unresolved, she said, quoting her own paper as if it were scripture, and walked off with one heel sinking into the clubhouse lawn. When we got home, Grandpa taped the yellow notice to the refrigerator with the lobster magnet we brought them from Maine, because that's what you do when the absurd needs company. He opened the binder again, read the definitions again, read them out loud. He says sometimes nonsense only shows itself when you let it echo. That night we went to the community hall, the one that always smells like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner, and took chairs near the aisle. I carried the folder the way altar boys carry books they can't drop. The board lined up behind their long plastic table, name placards propped like little tombstones. We'll begin with public comments, Ms. Klein said, tapping a pen against the table to establish jurisdiction over the room. 2 minutes, please. Grandpa stood. He always stands like a person taught a long time ago that the floor belongs to the judge. The clock belongs to God, and you may borrow both if you're brief. Silas Merrick. Alder Court, he said. I'm here about a notice of violation for my mailbox. Heads turned. Someone cleared a throat with the conviction of a gavel. Bylaws, Phoebe 3.2. He read, prohibits temporary or unpermitted structures overnight. Our mailbox is anchored in concrete and was approved when installed. It is therefore neither temporary nor unpermitted. Thank you, Mr. Merrick, Ms. Klein said, smiling like a hostess closing a door. Appeal denied. That wasn't an appeal, Grandpa said pleasantly. That was a citation with a citation of my own. There were a few laughs, quickly swallowed. It is hard to laugh in fluorescent light. Grandpa set the photocopy on the table and slid it toward the secretary, who typed with a ferocity that made her laptop sound like rain finding gutters. Appendix B lists tents. Canopies, inflatable decorations. Grandpa said. No mention of mailboxes. A board member with a plaid tie leaned into the mic. The spirit of the rule isn't the letter Grandpa finished for him. And your notice is written in letters. Helen touched his elbow. Don't lose sleep, she whispered. I sleep fine when the math adds up, he whispered back. Ms. Klein clicked her pen once. We have many items tonight, she said. We must move along. With respect, Grandpa said this will be brief. I'm requesting inspection of the records related to my violation and request that the clause you're relying on be read into the minutes. Noted, she said. That word usually comes with a verb, Grandpa said, and a laugh escaped the room it wasn't supposed to be in. They moved on to landscaping bids as if nothing had happened, but something had a room full of neighbors had seen a man ask for the page. The projector whirred to life and drew a rectangle of cold light on the wall, and I saw the moment as clearly as if it had been diagrammed. There are stories you can push back into a drawer, and there are stories that once unfolded refuse to be made small again. By the time the gavel made its plastic toque and people stood to leave in little constellations, the air in the hallway had the brittle taste of January. Outside, cold made our breath visible, which always feels like proof you're alive. Already, Helen said when she saw the new yellow paper clinging to the mailbox post like a leaf that didn't know it was winter. Second offense. The header fattened itself like it had eaten well between meetings. Efficient, Grandpa said, and pulled it free. Educational, he corrected, and slid it into the folder beside its sibling like a matching sock. Back in the living room, I watched him write the date in the corner in neat square letters. He underlined second offense once, then twice. He has a way of writing that looks patient even when he's furious. He says patience is rage with a library card. His phone chimed with the tone he saves for trouble dressed like procedure. He tilted it toward us. Hearing. Scheduled, the subject sang in neutral font. Don't lose sleep, Helen said. "I won't," he said, and then he didn't sleep at all. The next morning we met David at the diner because some lessons require bacon grease and a bottomless carafe. David is one of those retired judges you're never sure are retired. His calendar respects him, not the other way around. He slid into the booth and didn't small talk. "HOA hearings aren't justice," he said by way of hello. "They're theater." "Matinees or evening shows?" Grandpa asked. "Matinees," David said. "Less suspense, more retirees." He unsnapped a leather portfolio that looked older than me and set a thin case file on the table between the toast and the sugar caddy. "Artifact 1, he said. It was a county case where a board treated bylaws like preferences and got corrected by someone who treats words like tools, not wallpaper. They lost because they hid. David said, "Sunlight is a rule of evidence." "Define reasonable time for document inspection," Grandpa said, because even retired, he asks questions like he's being paid by the hour. 30 days, David said. "If they stall, you write. If they stall, again, you demand. Be boring. Boredom is a weapon." "See," Helen said to me like a woman collecting proof that her husband wasn't making up aphorisms. David gave us Lever's financial inspection. First minute, second enforcement logs by category patterns, not names, because if Order 3.2 really covers mailboxes, this neighborhood is a crime scene. "What do I ask for?" "First," Grandpa asked. "Budget's general ledger enforcement counts by type," David said. "Frame it in dates and formats, not feelings." We were paying the check when Tomas, 3 houses down, a man who looks like he's always carrying a glass too full, slid into the booth long enough to leave a folded set of papers. Board work session. Not for distribution. That was the header. The content was the quiet part out loud. Enforcement discretion, friends goodwill. And the line that made Grandpa's pen pause mid-air. Coordinate second notice where pushback remains. "You didn't get them from me," Tomas said. "We didn't," Grandpa said. By the time we turned onto Alder Court again, the mailbox had another gift, a certified letter with a green striped edge that makes your stomach prepare for bad news on general principle. Mandatory hearing. The heading said in bold, and below, that a date that managed to be both soon and smug. That night, the projector in the clubhouse threw a cold rectangle of public shaming across a wall as Ms. Klein narrated my grandfather's front yard like it was a crime scene. Community eyesore. The slide read in red font that always means someone is proud of themselves. Grandpa stood. "He doesn't mind standing alone if the page is on his side. I'm only following the rules you wrote," he said. Calm. The kind of calm that has teeth. "Order," Ms. Klein said, though no one had disordered anything yet. A board member in plaid leaned to his mic. "It's about precedent," he said. "Then your minutes will show precedent," Grandpa said. "May we read them into the record?" "We'll take that under advisement," the board member said, and the secretary typed under advisement as if the words might do push-ups and become action. The night ended with a vote that felt rehearsed and a promise that further action will follow. The hallway outside smelled like wool and impatience, 2 human materials that burn fast. On our coffee table at home, a certified letter waited to become heavier. Notice of lien. Past due. Assessments, penalties, intent to attach property in 30 days. Helen's voice did a small thing I don't hear often. "They can't take our house," she said, and it wasn't a question, but it wanted an answer. "Not if they're bluffing with a broken trumpet," Grandpa said. He pulled the charter again, and we watched him do the thing he does better than anyone I know, read until the words give up their tricks. "Here," he said at last, tapping a paragraph the way you tap a fish tank to get a lazy swimmer's attention. "No lien shall be recorded absent authorization consistent with the association's voting procedures for special enforcement." In English, I asked. In English, he said they need a vote, a real one. Notice to members. Quorum. Certification. If they skipped that step, they're threatening with an instrument they don't own. Helen exhaled like she'd been holding a breath since 1987. "And if they claim emergency powers, then the emergency has a name," he said, and minutes that say so. He wrote to the HOA attorney with the kind of calm you can hear on paper receipt acknowledged. "Please provide meeting minutes and vote certification for Special Enforcement Authorization Charter RE7. 4+ general ledgers and enforcement logs by category for the past 3 fiscal years." He hit send and leaned back like someone who had put a loaded tray on a table that had always insisted it could hold the weight. "Grandpa," I said. "Yes, kid. If they won't give it back, if the house they meet in, if they don't follow their own rules, what then?" He put his finger on a different page and read a line that made the hair on my arms stand up the way car radios used to make them when a favorite song arrived in the middle. In the event, the association materially misuses common facilities or materially violates member rights of access and governance. Beneficial use shall revert to the membership until corrected by vote, consistent with charter procedures. He smiled the way people smile when they finally see the thing that's been hiding in plain sight. Then he said, "We don't ask them to give it back." "What do we do?" I asked. "We take it," he said, and the word didn't sound like violence, it sounded like math. The clubhouse lights always buzz like a dare, daring you to stay reasonable when reason is the last thing in the air. That night, the projector whined to life and threw a rectangle of cold light across the wall. On it, huge and ridiculous, was our mailbox, crooked only because someone had stood at the wrong angle labeled in red font that read like graffiti community eyesore. Neighbors whispered behind us. Fabric rustled, someone coughed into their sleeve. A woman 2 rows back said the word ugly, not loud, but loud enough to travel. Helen's hand found Grandpa's sleeve, a signal that meant breathe a reminder that sometimes silence wins. But Grandpa stood anyway. He stood like a man who had been standing in courtrooms longer than some of these board members had been alive. "I'm only following the rules you wrote," he said. His voice carried without shouting. 3. 2 prohibits temporary or unpermitted structures. Our mailbox is permanent. It was approved. It has stood anchored in concrete for over a decade. Ms. Klein clicked the remote and the next slide showed a close-up of chipped paint, the flaw magnified into a crater. This, she said, is not in keeping with neighborhood standards. House numbers nearly invisible. Safety compromised. Visible from the curb, Grandpa said. Compliant. A board member in plaid leaned to his microphone. "It's about precedent." "Then your minutes will show precedent," Grandpa answered. "Please read them into the record." The secretary typed with fingers that made a sound like rain on an old roof. Under advisement, the screen read, Neighbors shifted in their folding chairs. I could feel the air splitting tribe from tribe. Some nodded toward the board, others toward Grandpa. The HOA attorney flown in like backup cleared his throat. "This is a hearing, not a court of law. The board has discretion." "Discretion," Grandpa repeated, "isn't exemption. Discretion requires consistency. If my mailbox is a violation, so is every mailbox in this subdivision. If it isn't, then this notice is void." The room hummed. Someone in the back said, "He's right," before being shushed. Ms. Klein raised her gavel, plastic but heavy with habit, and brought it down. Appeal denied. Further action will follow. That phrase, "further action will follow," landed like a lock clicking shut. Aftermath. We left to the sound of wool coats brushing past us and polite gossip snapping in low tones. On the walk home, the air had the sharp taste of January. At the curb, a new yellow sheet clung to the post like it had been waiting. Second offense. The heading announced as if the paper had been eating vitamins. Efficient, Grandpa said, tearing it free. Educational. Inside, he lined the 2 notices side by side on the dining table like evidence in a mock trial. He dated them in his neat squared script and underlined second offense once. Rage looks different on him. It's patient, methodical, like someone sharpening a knife with sandpaper instead of a wheel. That night, his phone chimed with the HOA's special brand of cheerless font, mandatory hearing attendance required. Helen closed her eyes, opened them again, and sighed. "Don't lose sleep. I won't," Grandpa said, but the light from his study burned past midnight. The diner meeting. The next morning, the 3 of us sat in a booth at the Maple Street Diner where the coffee is bottomless and the bacon grease has worked itself into the walls. Across from Grandpa sat David Calder, retired judge neighbor, 3 streets over, and the kind of man who still carried himself like juries might be hiding under the salt shaker. Silas David said using Grandpa's first name, but with courtroom weight. HOA hearings aren't justice, they're theater. Matinees or evening shows, Grandpa asked, not looking up from his notes. Matinees, David said. Less suspense, more retirees. He slid a case file across the table. Artifact 1. Inside, a county case where another HOA had lost because they hid records they were required by law to show. They lost not on fairness but on procedure, David said. Sunlight isn't optional. Helen stirred her coffee until the spoon clinked like a metronome. "What are you telling him to do? Boredom," David said simply. "Request financials, minutes, enforcement logs. By statute, they owe you access within 30 days. If they stall, you ask again. If they stall again, you demand." calmly. Persistence is a lever. Grandpa's pen moved across his narrow-ruled ledger. Financials. 30 days, minutes enforcement logs. His handwriting looked like bricks patient and square. And if they keep stalling, I asked. David buttered his toast slowly. Then you have a record of their refusal. Courts like records. Grandpa nodded once. Records are boring. Boredom is a weapon, David said again. He leaned closer. But don't argue at the hearing. Present. They'll try to make it personal. You keep it procedural. Helen touched Grandpa's arm. Promise. Procedural, Grandpa said. The leak. That was when Tomas appeared. He's the maintenance guy at the clubhouse, sometimes thin shoulders, a face that always looks like he's carrying something fragile. He slid into the booth, checked over his shoulder, and placed a folded set of papers on the table. Don't say my name, he whispered. Please. Grandpa put a hand over his. You have my word. Then Tomas slipped out, leaving us with what he'd risked board work session notes not for distribution. Secret minutes. Bullet points in blunt language, enforcement discretion, friends, goodwill. And the line that made Helen's mouth form a silent O. Coordinate second notice where pushback remains. They planned it, I said. The second violation before the first was settled. Selective enforcement, David murmured, almost pleased. Exactly what you needed. Grandpa slid the pages under his binder like contraband. His jaw tightened in that way I'd seen in photos from his trial day's courtroom posture spine, a line. They want theater, he said softly. We'll give them records. The certified letter, back home. The mailbox gave us a green-striped envelope, cheerful in design and dire in content. Notice of lien, it announced. Penalties. Intent to attach property in 30 days. Helen's voice broke. Attach our property. They can foreclose. Not if they skipped a step, Grandpa said. He spread the charter across the coffee table like maps for a campaign. He read aloud until the language turned from dense to devastating. Here, 47.4. No lien shall be recorded absent authorization consistent with the association's voting procedures for special enforcement. In English, I asked. In English, Grandpa said they need a member vote. Proper notice. Quorum. Certification. They never held one, which means this threat has no teeth. Helen exhaled, sharp and shaky. And if they claim emergency powers, then the emergency has a name in the minutes, and their minutes don't have one. Patricia, our neighbor, dropped by with a tote of cookies and her quiet fury. I've seen misuse, she said. Invoices for landscaping that never happened. Reimbursements for dinners labeled as community events. The president's friends fined, then mysteriously credited back. Grandpa wrote in his ledger, irregularities request ledgers. The fire popped in the grate. Outside, branches dragged across the window in the wind. Grandpa typed a letter to the HOA attorney calm as glass receipt acknowledged. Please provide meeting minutes and vote certification for special enforcement authorization, Charter 47.4. Please also produce financial ledgers and enforcement logs by category for the past 3 fiscal years. He hit send. The whoosh of the email sounded final. Then he looked at me. If they misuse the clubhouse, if they violate rights of access, he said, tapping a clause in the deed. I hadn't noticed then, beneficial use reverts to the membership. He smiled. That's not asking. That's taking. If you've never watched a neighborhood try to be a courtroom, it starts with folding chairs and ends with people remembering what their hands are for. The mandatory hearing was set for 7, which in our subdivision means 6:47, because people like to feel prepared. By 6:35, the clubhouse parking lot had turned into a slow parade of SUVs and minivans, backup cameras chirping turn signals, blinking like nerves. Grandpa ironed his tie navy with faint pin dots, the same one he wore to my college graduation, and tucked the HOA charter and the clubhouse deed into his leather portfolio. He checked the stack twice, then placed a pen on top as if to tell the pages to behave. Helen smoothed his collar and said the only thing that matters before you walk into a room where someone intends to embarrass you, you are not alone. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed like a memory of dental work. The room smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. A folding table stretched across the front, draped with a poly tablecloth that pretended to dignify plastic. Name placards. Klein, Peters, Dupree were propped like tiny headstones. At the far end sat the HOA attorney, dark suit, clipped hair, a legal pad laid out like a runway. Neighbors filled rows in a pattern you come to recognize: couples with arms folded to hold themselves still, older men with baseball caps folded in their laps, teenagers on their phones until their parents elbowed meaning into their sides. Patricia found us and squeezed Grandpa's arm, then mine. David slid into a seat in the third-row center where judges sit when they don't have a bench. The secretary tapped at her laptop, the red recording dot in the corner already blinking. Across the top of her word processor, hearing. Transcript, Merrick. The microphone on the table blinked like an impatient eye. Ms. Klein took her place in the middle, picked up the gavel, and rapped it twice. The sound was hollow and a little too proud. "We'll come to order," she said. "This is a mandatory hearing regarding violations issued to homeowner Silas Merrick under Bylaws Par 3.2 temporary or unpermitted structures prohibited overnight." She nodded to the attorney who stood with the ease of a man who practices standing. "The association," he began, "seeks compliance with duly adopted covenants. Mr. Merrick has received multiple notices for an overnight structure, his mailbox, which fails to meet aesthetic and safety standards. Fines have been levied. Continued non-compliance will result in further action." He didn't say the word lien. He didn't have to. It was sitting on our coffee table at home, bolded and officious. "Exhibit A," Ms. Klein said, and the projector threw a rectangle of cold light onto the wall. Our mailbox loomed larger than any mailbox should loom. "Community eyesore." The slide announced in red letters that overachieved. A murmur passed through the room, the sound of 100 people choosing sides without moving their feet. Helen's hand found Grandpa's sleeve. He squeezed her fingers once and stood. He didn't bother to face the board. He faced the neighbors. "I'm only following the rules you wrote," he said, voice even. D3.2 prohibits temporary or unpermitted structures. My mailbox is neither. It's anchored in concrete. It was approved. The attorney tilted his head. "This is not a court of law, Mr. Merrick. The board has discretion." "Discretion," Grandpa said quietly, "is not license. Discretion requires consistency. If a permitted anchored mailbox is a violation, then so is every permitted anchored mailbox in Maple Ridge." He nodded toward the screen. "No one here wants to live in a neighborhood where the letter of the law means whatever the board needed it to mean that week." Ms. Klein clicked to the next slide, a close-up of chipped paint traced with a Sharpie to make it look like a canyon. "Standards matter," she said. "House numbers barely visible." "Visible from the curb," Grandpa said. "Compliant." A man 2 rows behind us muttered, "Paint the box," and a woman shushed him with the authority of a Sunday school teacher. The attorney slid a sheet forward. "Mr. Merrick has refused to comply. The association has been patient. That patience is not endless." Grandpa opened his portfolio and lifted out the charter. He set it on the table with the ceremony of a librarian returning a rare volume. "Then let's make sure patience isn't covering for procedure," he said. He turned to the secretary. "For the transcript, please note that I request inspection of records pursuant to the member rights provision, minutes, financial ledgers, and enforcement logs by category for the last 3 fiscal years." The secretary's fingers tapped. "Request, minutes, ledgers, and enforcement logs." Grandpa tapped the charter. "And because your attorney has raised the stakes off stage, notice of Lyon received last week, I'd like to read 47.4 into the record." He read slowly, the way you read something that is about to become furniture. "No lien shall be recorded, absent authorization consistent with the association's voting procedures for special enforcement." He looked up. "Please produce the date of the member vote authorizing special enforcement liens, the notice to members' quorum certification, and the tally." The attorney's chin lifted. "This is a hearing, not discovery. This is your rules," Grandpa said. "And your lien. If you skipped the vote, your instrument is a toy trumpet, loud but empty." There was a rustle. Someone said, "Good," under his breath. Ms. Klein tapped the gavel. "Order." Grandpa didn't sit. He lifted a second document thinner with an older font. "And this," he said, "is the clubhouse deed." The room shifted. You could feel it, a neighborhood leaning forward. He placed the deed where the first 2 rows could read over his shoulder, then traced a paragraph with his forefinger. "There's a reversion clause," he said. "You wrote it, or your predecessors did. In the event the association materially misuses common facilities or materially violates member rights of access and governance, beneficial use shall revert to the membership until corrected by vote, consistent with charter procedures." The attorney snorted. It came out thinner than he meant. "Boilerplate. A promise Grandpa corrected, and a key, Ms. Klein swallowed hard enough for us to see it. She tried a smile. "Mr. Merrick, limit your remarks to the matter of your mailbox." "My mailbox is the string you pulled," Grandpa said, still facing the neighbors. "And I am showing you everything that's tied to it." He gestured gently like a conductor reminding amateurs where the beat lives. Here's what's happened: selective enforcement. Secret work sessions where policy is discussed and scripted outside of minutes. A second violation coordinated before the first was resolved. He lifted a sheet and read a line from Tomas's leaked notes without naming Tomas. Coordinate second notice where pushback remains. A wave moved through the room. Not a shout. Not yet. The sound people make when a thing they suspected announces itself plainly. The plaid tie board member leaned toward his mic. We have to maintain standards. We cannot permit. You cannot prevent sunlight, Grandpa said. You cannot threaten liens you don't have authority to record. He turned back to the secretary. Please add to the transcript formal request for vote certification notice to members' quorum record and tally regarding any special enforcement liens. Her fingers tapped. Request vote, sir? Notice? Quorum and tally. The attorney put his palm on the table, a gesture meant to settle the water. Mr. Merrick is attempting to hijack a hearing to grandstand. Grandpa finally faced the table. No, he said, gentle enough to sting. I am attempting to keep you inside your own lines. Ms. Klein raised the gavel, overshot the block, and set it down carefully like she could put the moment back together if she didn't add sound to it. The board moves to uphold the violation, she said quickly. Second. Second, the scarfed board member said. Discussion, Grandpa asked. None, Ms. Klein said. Hands rose in a hurry meant to look like resolve. Motion carries, Ms. Klein said. Further action will follow, Grandpa finished softly. He let the echo sit. Then he looked at the neighbors again. Words are easy. Records are heavier. He lifted the deed once more, held it like a lantern, and read the clause again slower. Materially misuses common facilities like staging enforcement policy in closed undocumented sessions. Materially violates member rights of access and governance like denying inspection, misstating minutes, or threatening liens without votes. He let the silence do a measure of work. Then, as simply as a man telling you it's Tuesday, he said, By your own charter, and by this deed, you have separated yourselves from the authority you're claiming. Beneficial use doesn't belong to you when you act like this. It belongs to the membership. Someone gasped. Someone clapped once and then stopped as if they'd dropped a utensil at a quiet dinner. The attorney tried to laugh. It clipped off at the end. You can't seize property with speeches, Mr. Merrick. This isn't a speech, Grandpa said. It's arithmetic. He set the deed flat, placed the charter beside it, and touched both with an index finger. 2 + 2 = reversion. The sentence traveled. I could feel it move across the room the way heat moves slow at first and then all at once. Ms. Klein's mouth opened. No words came. The gavel slipped beneath her hand and she found it by feel brought it down too hard. The plastic thunk made the microphone squeal. Order, she said, thin. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The room had adjusted to his volume. For the transcript, he said, eyes on the secretary. I am declaring that under the reversion clause, beneficial use of this clubhouse reverts to the membership until the abuses noted are corrected by a vote compliant with charter procedures. That includes open meetings for enforcement policy, proper notice, and certification for any special enforcement liens. The secretary looked up then back down as if to verify the words would become real once typed. Her fingers moved declaration beneficial use reverts to membership pending correction by vote. The attorney pointed at the screen as if it were a weapon. This is absurd. The board controls this room. The charter does, Grandpa said. The deed does. We do. He turned from the table and faced the neighbors fully. This clubhouse was built with your dues. Its lights are on because you pay the bill. The board is not a monarch. It's a steward. Stewardship ends where secrecy and selective enforcement begin. A man at the aisle stood up more surprised by himself than anyone else. Then whose is it? Grandpa didn't smile, but something like it passed through his face. He touched the deed again the way you touch a shoulder when you ask someone to step forward. By your own charter, he said, one clean beat per word. This clubhouse is no longer theirs, it's ours. The sentence broke the surface. A sound came up from the room that wasn't exactly clapping and wasn't exactly cheering. It was something older, a collective exhale that says we knew this, but we needed someone to say it in the language the Locks understand. People glanced at one another as if catching each other in the act of agreeing. Patricia's hand went to her mouth and then to her heart. David, who had promised not to intervene, nodded once the formal nod of a man entering something into an invisible record. The attorney's face reddened by half a shade. You cannot. We already have, Grandpa said, and the quiet that followed made the fluorescent buzz sound like applause. Ms. Klein tried to gather the rope back. "This is improper. The board will clear the room." "No," came a voice from the back. Eddie's. He stepped into the aisle, socks and sandals, stubbornness lifted to the rank of principal. "No, you won't?" Another voice. "Open the books." Another. "Read the minutes into the record." A woman near the front. "You fined me for a wreath and then credited your friend for a shed." She flushed as the room turned, then straightened. "I have receipts." The secretary glanced at Ms. Klein and then at Grandpa and then back at her screen as if to ask which of them would be signing her paycheck this month. Her fingers resumed their quiet reign. "Members demand open books, minutes, receipts." The attorney raised his legal pad the way a person raises a shield. "We will be conferring," he said. "Which is lawyer for, we need a minute to invent a strategy we should have had." He gestured to the board members and they leaned in a huddle of cardigans and intent. Grandpa didn't sit down. He didn't move. He just stood there with his hands flat on the table, touching the documents like a bridge between words and things. Helen leaned forward and brushed a piece of lint from his sleeve. The tiniest domestic act in a public moment, which is how you know a revolution is still a community. No one forgets the lint. David spoke, voice mild, aimed at the room, not the board. "Neighbors," he said, "what Mr. Merrick has done is not magic. It's maintenance. We will need a vote to ratify reforms. We will need sign-ups. We will need patience, more of it than we had with chipped paint." A ripple of laughter. Tonight isn't an ending. It's a beginning. The rules will either learn to serve us, or we will replace the people who make them forget how. Ms. Klein rapped the gavel again. The sound was softer now, as if the wood had learned something. "Meeting adjourned," she said, and the words sounded less like a command and more like a truce. She stood but didn't quite leave the shadow of the table. Neighbors didn't file out. They flowed forward. The first row crowded the table to look at the clause. Fingers traced the paragraph like Braille. People snapped photos with their phone screens lighting faces. The deed looked suddenly less like paper and more like a mirror. Every time someone leaned in, they saw themselves framed by a rule that had been hiding in plain sight. Patricia put a hand on Grandpa's shoulder. "You didn't raise your voice," she said. "You raised the room." He shrugged in that particular way he has when the adrenaline is leaving shoulders down, breath long. They hate being told they're wrong, but they can live with being shown it. "You seized it," I said, and even though the word tasted like the headline we'd chosen, it didn't feel aggressive in my mouth. It felt accurate. "I read it," he said. Reading well is the gentlest way to take something back. We stepped outside into air that smelled like cold and the relief of not pretending. The clubhouse door sighed on its hydraulic hinge, a tired animal finally allowed to rest. Through the glass we could still see the knot of neighbors around the table, the red recording dot blinking a quiet promise that the sentence would live in the minutes where it belonged. On the walkway, Eddie caught up and shook Grandpa's hand like men used to do when deals lived on handshakes. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. "You took the keys without taking the lock." "Not me," Grandpa said, nodding back toward the room. "We did. We reached the mailbox at the curb and stopped like you do at a grave that isn't a grave anymore. The projector had made it look worse than it is. Up close, it was just a box, scuffed loyal." Grandpa laid his palm on the post and smiled. "They turned a chip into a weapon," he said. "We turned a clause into a shield." Helen laced her fingers through his. "What now?" she asked, because after the first sentence of a new chapter, there is always that question. "Now we do boring things," he said. "Petitions, notices, votes, open ledgers. We replace work sessions with meetings that have chairs and minutes and lights people can turn on by themselves." "Boredom is a weapon," I said, and he laughed. "Really?" Laughed, the kind that starts in the chest and climbs. "Sometimes it's a cure," he said. Phones buzzed around us, group texts forming subject lines already writing themselves. Reforms, open books. New board, people walked past carrying a new kind of energy, the kind that doesn't need a march to count. They nodded at us the way you nod at neighbors who just helped carry a heavy piece of furniture you'd all agreed was in the wrong room. Grandpa took one last look at the clubhouse at the windows, reflecting a sky that had been waiting to be invited in. 2 + 2, he said, as if to himself. Equals reversion. I finished? Equals home, Helen added, and for the first time that night the word didn't feel like something to defend. It felt like something to use. We went inside to add our names to a sheet titled Members Wishing to Inspect Records, and then another titled Petition to Reform HOA Leadership. The pens scratched. The secretary typed. The red dot blinked, and for a moment, maybe a long moment, maybe one long enough to last. Our neighborhood sounded like people remembering how to run a place they already owned. The certified envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, green-striped like a candy cane no one asked for. Grandpa set it on the counter without opening it right away, the way a man sets down a loaded mousetrap. Helen stood beside him with her arms folded, waiting. When he finally slit the seal with the careful motion of a surgeon, the words shouted before he could finish the page. Notice of lien. Intent to attach property if unpaid within 30 days. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Attach our property. Silas, they can't. They can threaten, Grandpa said. He laid the page flat and reached for the binder. Threatening is cheaper than proving. He flipped to the charter fingers, steady lips moving as his eyes ran the paragraphs like a man searching for a forgotten landmark. Clause 7.4, he muttered. No lien shall be recorded absent authorization consistent with the association's voting procedures for special enforcement. He looked at me, which means they need a vote, not just the board. Members, quorum, certification. Did you see any notices for such a vote? No, I said. Helen shook her head too. We'd know. Exactly, Grandpa said, tapping the clause, so either they skipped the vote or they held a ghost meeting. Either way, their lien is made of smoke, the firewood of evidence. Patricia arrived that evening with her long coat buttoned high and a tote bag clinking with Tupperware. She set cookies on the table and leaned over the notice. I've seen smoke before, she said. Invoices for landscaping that never happened. Dinners reimbursed as community events. Friends of the president fined, then credited later. Grandpa's pen moved across his narrow ledger. Irregularities request ledgers. Patricia lowered her voice. They're stretched thin. I think they cover holes with words. Helen poured tea. Words don't cover liens. No, Grandpa said, but paper does. We'll request the ledgers by category, not by name. We're not starting a brawl, we're balancing books. He drafted a letter on his laptop, his typing slow but precise. Pursuant to member rights under the Charter and nonprofit statutes, I request inspection of 1 certified minutes of any member vote authorizing special enforcement liens, 2 quorum records and tallies, 3 general ledgers for the last 3 fiscal years, 4 enforcement logs by category. He signed it, scanned it, and sent it to the HOA attorney with the kind of calm that sounded like boredom, but wasn't. When the whoosh of the email sent Helen blew out a breath. You're going to make them furious. They're already furious, Grandpa said. Now they'll be documented. Neighbors begin to whisper. Word spread not because Grandpa wanted it to, but because neighborhoods talk like trees in wind, quietly steadily bending toward each other. Eddie ambled across the street in his socks and sandals the next morning. Heard about the lien, he said, scratching behind his dog's ears. That's serious. Only if you believe in ghosts, Grandpa answered. They missed the vote. Eddie tilted his head. So you're saying they fined me for tulips in the wrong color palette, but couldn't even vote right for a lien? Exactly, Grandpa said. And if they misuse procedure, we all pay. By Saturday afternoon, 3 other neighbors had knocked on our door, each carrying a story. A fence fined, a wreath removed, a paint swatch rejected, all with no record of similar penalties for the president's friends. Patricia called it what it was, selective enforcement. I watched Grandpa listen to each story with his lawyer's patience, jotting notes in his ledger. He never told anyone what to do. He only asked the same question, do you want consistency or control? By the 3rd time, people knew the answer before they knocked. The spark. On Sunday, the mailbox delivered another envelope. This one wasn't official. It was a photocopy folded crooked with smudged ink from a too-warm copier. At the top, petition to reform HOA leadership. Signatures needed. No one had signed yet. No one had even claimed authorship. It was a blank sheet with a question written across it in legalese. Grandpa unfolded it, smoothed it flat, and studied it as though the paper had asked for his counsel. Anonymous, Helen said. That's dangerous. Or careful, Grandpa replied. He tapped the header. Somebody knows the right word. Reform, not dissolve. That matters. Patricia picked it up. We need names, otherwise they'll say it's fiction. Grandpa closed the binder with a quiet snap. Then, let's start collecting them. Lemonade and pens. The next Saturday, under the shade of the cottonwoods, Helen set up a folding table with a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of Patricia's cookies. David brought clipboards. Grandpa brought the petition rewritten with cleaner margins and sharper phrasing. At the top, we the undersigned members of Maple Ridge petition for reform of HOA leadership to require open meetings, certified votes for special enforcement, and public financial disclosure. People drifted by, Curious at first, cautious next, then braver. Mr. Moreno, whose paint application had been pending for months, read the paragraph with his lips moving, then signed with a sigh like air leaving a balloon. A young couple with a stroller hesitated, but Helen handed them lemonade and said, "You moved into a community. This is how you join one." They signed too. Not everyone did. A man in a baseball cap handed the clipboard back untouched. "You're going to raise our dues," he said. "Transparency has a cost," Grandpa answered, "but it's cheaper than confusion." Another neighbor whispered, "They'll retaliate." Patricia's voice was steady. They already did. By late afternoon, the petition had 3 full sheets of names, the ink still wet in places. Children chalked hopscotch on the pavement, the trash truck rattled down the street, and the air smelled like sunscreen and barbecue. Ordinary life wrapped itself around extraordinary paperwork. The numbers. At dusk, we gathered at the folding table. Grandpa counted quietly. Patricia lined the sheets. David initialed each page. Helen held the stack like a loaf of bread. "Majority," she asked. Comfortably, David said, doing the math twice. Grandpa looked at the names, then at the clubhouse across the street, its windows reflecting the last gold of the day. "This is the first vote," he said softly. "Informal, but undeniable. They can ignore notices. They can't ignore neighbors." Helen kissed his cheek. "You just turned boredom into a bonfire." The blowback came fast. Monday morning, Grandpa's inbox pinged with a message from the HOA attorney, "Prepare for dissolution hearing." The board would consider leadership changes in response to recent disturbances. The letter was formal, clipped, and terrified. Grandpa read it aloud. Patricia's jaw dropped. David only smiled. "They're calling it dissolution. They don't realize they just gave you the word you needed." "What word?" I asked. "Clarity," David said. "We're not dismantling, we're cleaning." Grandpa folded the notice into his ledger and wrote one sentence underlined twice. "The clubhouse belongs to the membership until they learn their own rules." A new rhythm. In the days that followed, the neighborhood hummed like it hadn't in years. People came in 2s and 3s to sign. Someone taped a copy of the petition to the bulletin board outside the clubhouse, and by morning there were new signatures in pencil ballpoint, even green crayon. Children asked why grown-ups were signing homework. Their parents said, "Because it counts." Grandpa walked the block each evening, not campaigning, just listening. He carried the charter under his arm the way some men carry a newspaper. When neighbors asked him what would happen next, he didn't promise victory. He promised votes. "Votes are boring," he'd say. "That's the point." One night, as sprinklers hissed in arcs and cicadas whined in the trees, Helen asked him the question she'd been holding back. What if they win, anyway? Grandpa looked at the mailbox, newly sanded and painted, its numbers gleaming in the porch light. "Then they win with us watching," he said. "And watching changes the math. Toward the next battle." The petition was only the start. The real fight, dissolution, elections reforms, waited ahead. But something had shifted. You could feel it in the way neighbors lingered at the curb, in the way people waved more often, in the way kids drew chalk castles in the street without parents glancing nervously toward the clubhouse. Grandpa stood taller, not because the fight was over, but because it was no longer just his. He had turned a mailbox fine into a reversion clause into a petition, and a petition into a movement. The clubhouse wasn't seized with chains or locks. It was seized with paper pens and signatures. And for the first time, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to itself. The flyer was taped crooked to the clubhouse door. I saw it before Grandpa did, fluttering in the breeze like a flag too embarrassed to fly straight. At the top, in bold, "Notice of Dissolution Hearing." Beneath, smaller print, "To consider the removal and reconstitution of current HOA leadership in response to recent disturbances." Grandpa read it once, then again, and finally said the kind of sentence you'd only hear from a man who has survived 40 years of courtrooms. "They think calling it dissolution will scare us. They don't realize it's the word that saves us." Helen pressed her lips together. "Save us from what?" "From pretending they're still in charge," he said. The gathering storm. The night of the hearing, cars lined the street like dominoes. Headlights blinked off one by one until the clubhouse lot looked like a carnival where no one smiled. Neighbors clustered in knots, some clutching clipboards, some only clutching themselves. Patricia bustled toward us with her tote of cookies because even revolutions need sugar. "Majority signatures," she whispered, tapping the folder under her arm. Comfortably above 50%. Enough to force a vote. David adjusted his hat and murmured, "They'll fight like cornered cats." But cats scratch because they're out of options. Inside, the air buzzed with a tension that felt like static before a storm. The secretary's laptop was already open. Red dot, blinking transcript dissolution hearing. The board sat stiff behind their plastic table. Ms. Klein, in her scarf, knotted tight the attorney in a suit that tried to look expensive but sagged at the elbows. Grandpa laid his portfolio on the front row chair, flipped it open, and rested his palm on the charter like a pastor with a well-worn Bible. Opening gambit. Ms. Klein rapped the gavel. This meeting will come to order. Tonight we will address disruptive behavior and the unauthorized petition circulated in the community. Unauthorized. The word slithered across the room. People shifted. A man in the back said I signed it loud enough for his neighbors to nod. Grandpa stood. With respect, Ms. Klein, petitions don't need your authorization. They need ours. He raised the folder Patricia had handed him. 112 signatures. Verified addresses. Majority of membership. That's more authorization than any of you had when you fined us for tulips or wreaths or chipped paint. The secretary typed quickly 112 signatures presented. Majority confirmed. The attorney cleared his throat. The board acknowledges receipt but disputes validity. Grandpa smiled faintly, the kind of smile that meant he'd been waiting for that exact phrase. Then let's test validity the same way you test everything else by the charter. He tapped the book. Article 5. Member petitions exceeding majority shall require the board to convene a vote on reforms within 30 days. You taped the notice. You called the hearing. Congratulations, you complied if accidentally. The board's last stand. Ms. Klein's lips tightened. Mr. Merrick, this constant badgering undermines the harmony of Maple Ridge. Harmony without honesty is just humming over static, Grandpa said. Plaid Tie leaned forward. Our duty is to maintain standards. Then why hold work sessions in secret? Grandpa asked. He held up Tomas's leaked notes without saying his name. Coordinate second notice where pushback remains. That's not standards, that's strategy. A murmur rippled. Someone whispered, I got one of those notices. The attorney bristled. These so-called notes are inadmissible. Grandpa tilted his head. This isn't a courtroom, remember. By your rules, anything typed, discussed, or recorded regarding enforcement must be included in the minutes. You hid them. That's misuse. And misuse, he laid his hand flat on the deed photocopy trigger's reversion. The word hung there. Reversion. Some neighbors mouthed it silently, testing its weight. The turning point. David rose from his seat, voice calm. I've served on the bench for 30 years. I know what reversion means. It means you promise the members that if you abused authority, control reverts to them until corrected by lawful vote. Promises written in deeds don't dissolve in secret meetings. The room inhaled as one. Patricia stepped forward, lifting the petition like an offering. We want a vote. Open books, certified minutes, no more fines that vanish for friends. Ms. Klein slammed the gavel. Out of order. No, Eddie called from the back, standing tall in his socks and sandals. In order. Finally, in order. Others rose. A woman waved her notice for a wreath fine. A man shook a bill for landscaping that never happened. Voices layered until the clubhouse sounded less like a meeting and more like a choir warming up. Grandpa waited, then lifted his hand. The room settled like water after a stone. Neighbors, he said they can adjourn gavel threaten, but they can't erase signatures. They can't erase Clause 7.4. They can't erase the deed's promise. Beneficial use of this clubhouse is ours until they correct their abuses. The seizure. The attorney stood face flushed. You cannot seize property with rhetoric. Grandpa turned, addressing not him, but everyone else. This isn't rhetoric. It's arithmetic. 112 signatures. A majority. Clause 7.4, no lien without a vote. Reversion clause use, reverts to members upon misuse. 2 plus 2. He touched the deed. Equals ours. The word ours detonated quietly like a firework muffled in snow, but still lighting the sky. Applause broke first from Patricia, then Eddie, then a wave of clapping that swelled until even people who hadn't signed the petition found themselves joining. Ms. Klein struck the gavel once, twice, 3 times. But the sound was drowned in the rhythm of palms. The secretary's fingers flew. On her screen in black and white appeared the line that mattered: declaration beneficial use of clubhouse reverts to membership pending correction by lawful vote. A neighborhood stands. Neighbors surged forward, not angrily, hungrily. They crowded the table, snapping photos of the deed clause, comparing notes, shaking hands. Someone fetched a whiteboard from the storage closet and wrote across it, Next open finance session. Beneath, people scrawled questions. Where are our dues going? Who approved the landscaping contract? Children peeked in through the doorway, sensing something different. One whispered, "Did we win?" His mother answered, "We remembered it was ours." Helen leaned close to Grandpa. "You really did it." "No," he said softly, watching signatures turn into conversations. Conversations into plans. "We did it." After the gavel, the board filed out some red-faced, some pale, all smaller than they had been when they sat down. Ms. Klein lingered longest scarf still knotted tight, then disappeared into the night without looking back. The attorney muttered into his phone, but no one listened. His voice was a background noise now, like the buzz of the lights. Patricia set down her cookie tin on the table like a new gavel. "Meeting adjourned," she said, and the room laughed, not at her, but with relief. David clapped Grandpa's shoulder. "You didn't raise your voice once." "Didn't need to," Grandpa said. The claws did the shouting. Walking home. Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and freedom. Neighbors lingered under street lamps, forming small circles that looked more like block parties than strategy sessions. At the curb, our mailbox waited steady as always. Its paint gleamed under the lamplight, the numbers square the post unshaken. Grandpa rested his palm on it. "They called this an eyesore," he murmured. "But it's the straightest thing on the block." Helen tucked her arm into his. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we replace secrets with minutes and fines with fairness. Now we get boring again." "Boring?" I asked. He smiled. "Boredom is a weapon. Remember." And we walked home, the neighborhood humming around us, not with gossip, but with plans. The first thing you noticed wasn't the paperwork or the minutes or even the new placards on the board's table. It was the smell. Burgers and onions on the griddle buns toasting at the edges, ketchup packets crinkling in little fists. The clubhouse lawn, so often a stage for rules and reprimands, suddenly looked wider, younger, like a room rearranged after the heavy furniture is gone. Helen threaded her arm through Grandpa's. "You brought the tongs," she said, smiling at the bulge in his bag. "I brought options," Grandpa said. "Tongs, spatula, backup, spatula." The cottonwoods swayed above us, scattering shade like benevolence. Children chased a frisbee through the long light, shrieking when it drifted toward the hedge. Eddie's dog barked at the wrong things, but nobody minded. The new charter. On the bulletin board by the clubhouse door, the new charter hung behind glass, pinned at the corners with red ribbons someone had taped on like a wedding program. The headings gleamed through the glare: open meetings, financial disclosure, enforcement standards, vote certification. A small dot of barbecue sauce had already smudged the bottom corner. That dot said more than any lawyer could. It meant the charter belonged to the people, now not to the binders. Neighbors stopped to read it like it was scripture, nodding at each line. Some took photos. A boy traced his finger along the bold heading and asked his mother, "What's a certification?" She smiled and said, "Proof. Ordinary. Joys." David stood near the grill, not touching it, just advising like judges do. "Flip," once he told the teenager in charge of spatula duty. "Patience is a spice." Patricia arrived with potato salad that looked like it had been plated for a county fair. "No raisins," she announced, setting it down like a verdict. People clapped. She curtsied as though humor was part of the reforms, too. Helen kept busy handing out paper cups of lemonade, steadying the folding table whenever it wobbled. Grandpa drifted between groups, answering questions, accepting thanks he never asked for. His tie was gone, replaced by a short-sleeved shirt. The lawyer had turned back into a grandfather. The mailbox. Pilgrimage. At some point, without planning, we all drifted toward the row of mailboxes like pilgrims heading to a shrine. Grandpa rested his palm on ours, freshly painted numbers, straight, wood smooth under the varnish. They called it an eyesore, he said, but it outlasted their rules. Patricia knocked on the post with her knuckles. Stronger than their projector, that's for sure. David squinted at the numbers. "Plum," he said. I'd have ruled in its favor. Even kids patted the box like it was a pet. For weeks, it had been a symbol. Now it was just a mailbox again, and that felt like victory. The board's transition. Inside, the podium had been shifted off-center, less like a throne and more like a tool. The new board members stood in shirt sleeves and sundresses, not armor. The new president raised the microphone. "Neighbors," he began, voice nervous but warm, "we thought we'd show, not tell." He pointed to the bulletin board. "The charter changes are posted. You'll have copies in your inbox tonight and in your mailboxes tomorrow. First open finance session is scheduled for September. Enforcement policy will be set only in public meetings. Vote certifications will be published with minutes. No exceptions." Applause rose. Real applause, not nervous tapping. The new treasurer stepped forward. One more note, refunds. Where fines were levied improperly, dues will be credited back. Expect notices by Friday. This applause was louder, like a wave hitting exactly where it meant to. Grace in departure. Near the doorway, Ms. Klein stood with her scarf loose for the first time in memory. She didn't look defeated, just emptied, like someone who had finally set down a heavy bag. She stepped to the lectern, placed a single page on it, and said, "I'm resigning. Formally. I wish the new board well. I wish the neighborhood better. No jeers, no gloating. Just polite clapping, the kind you give someone who showed up late but left with dignity." A child offered her a cookie. She took it. The world didn't crack. A community again. The frisbee flew high, arcing against the blue. Lawn chairs creaked under the weight of neighbors who hadn't spoken in years but were now swapping recipes. The secretary, free of secrecy, pinned a new sheet to the bulletin board. Questions you'd like answered. 2 teenagers wrote pool hours and drew a cartoon shark. People laughed. Helen kissed Grandpa's cheek. "You shocked me," she said. "Why?" he asked. Grandpa the lawyer refusing a microphone. "I've had mine," he said. "Let the kids have it." He wandered back to the mailbox one more time, fingers brushing the spot where the chip had been sanded smooth. The scar was gone, but he knew where to touch. He smiled at me. Justice isn't loud. It's steady. Evening falls. As the sun leaned west, sprinklers hissed a live mist, catching the last light. The clubhouse door opened and closed with a rhythm that sounded like breathing. Through the glass, the taped sign caught the glow. "Thanks for helping us get this right." Neighbors carried plates, stories, hopes. Eddie's dog barked at nothing, and for once, nothing was wrong. We sat on the grass watching the clubhouse, the building that had been a weapon, then a battlefield, and finally simply ours. Grandpa leaned back on his hands, gazing at it like a man looking at his own front porch. "Think it'll last?" I asked. He chuckled. "Nothing lasts. That's why you write it down. Rules, deeds, minutes, they're just ways to remind ourselves tomorrow of what we meant today." Helen nestled against him. "And what did we mean today?" "That home," he said, nodding toward the mailbox, "the clubhouse, the neighbors clapping along to music from a tinny speaker, isn't property. It's people keeping promises." Later, as twilight wrapped the street in soft blue, I watched Grandpa slip the deed back into his portfolio. Not locked away, just kept safe. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like a man satisfied with a repair job well done. The projector's cold rectangle, the red font calling our mailbox an eyesore, those images would fade. But the sight of neighbors signing their names and rows of the secretary typing words she knew would live of the gavel landing, crooked against a tide of applause, those would remain. Grandpa didn't seize the clubhouse with force. He seized it with patience, with clauses no one else bothered to read, with boredom sharpened into a blade. And in doing so, he handed it back not to himself, but to everyone. As the stars pricked through the sky, the frisbee looped one last time. The grill hissed its final smoke. Children lay on the grass drawing constellations with their fingers. Grandpa stood stretched and looked around. "Quiet," he said. "The way it's supposed to be." Justice wasn't loud. It was steady. And in that steady hum, the sound of sprinklers' laughter and one repaired mailbox. Our neighborhood finally heard itself again.